好，开始吧，今天的生词。两个 tall
tuna
tuna 对 tuna soda 水就是那个 soda tuna 怎么会背这个单词呢？哎呦，不是细的，应该是音调。音调的 tuna soda. I was playing a tray with a whiskey and soda. Soda. Major Hapler also inspect 出来了吗 ？inspect with a respectful tone in his voice， 说明这个有点屌，这个 inspect， 是不是？soda tone 音调。这个背单词是太慢了，没意思。这是上一章写的，不搞死了。对，就是那个，但是它中间还少了一些人。继续。今天太困了。今天工作了好几个小时，而且一直在站着呢。好，继续吧。
When our local inspector, a man called Davis, and Police Constable Jones arrived, Ackroyd's secretary, Geoffrey Raymond, and Blunt were in the study with me. "Good evening, gentlemen," said Inspector Davis. "Now then, who found the body?" I explained the circumstances.
局限出现了好几个人记一下吗？市长是不是？市长的Inspector Davis， Davis， 就是个侦探了，and police 还有个警察说不出来。Jones, C. Jones, Costa Jones, and Paris Jones， 还有这个阿奎的秘书 Raymond。管家说到了。
Did it sound like Parker's voice on the telephone, Doctor? Well, I didn't really notice. I just assumed it was him. How long would you say Mr. Ackroyd has been dead, Doctor? Half an hour at least. The door was locked on the inside. What about the window? I closed and bolted it earlier in the evening at Mr. Ackroyd's request. The inspector walked across and opened the curtains. Well, it's open now. True. The lower sash was raised as high as it could go. Davis produced a torch and shone it.
这句话什么意思呢？ The lower sash was raised as high as it can go， 就是这个窗上或这堵墙就是足够低，低到一个人能从里面跳出去，然后就走，或跳进来，然后谋杀这个人。那 Davis 又说话了。Davis 是谁呢？就是那个 inspector。
looked along the window sill outside. This is the way he went, all right, and got in. In the light of the torch, several footprints could be seen. Are there any valuables missing? Geoffrey Raymond shook his head. Not that we can discover. I said nothing. But the blue envelope containing Mrs. Ferrer's letter had disappeared. Said the inspector. He turned to the butler. Have any suspicious strangers been hanging about? No, sir. When was Mr. Ackroyd last seen alive? Probably by me, I said, when I left at about 9 minutes. He told me that he didn't wish to be disturbed, and I repeated the order to Parker. Mr. Ackroyd was alive at 9:30, Raymond added.
就8点半的时候，8点40那个才走啊，所以说他死亡的时间就是8点我们是到9点10分这个时间到。Roman 是谁 ？Roman 就是管家呀。
I heard him talking in here. Who to? I assumed that it was Dr. Shepherd. I wanted to ask him about some papers I was working on. However, when I heard the voices, I remembered he wanted to talk to Dr. Shepherd without being disturbed, and I went away again.
像这样说的话，这个医生的那种最大的。
Who could have been with him at 9:30? Queried the inspector. It wasn't you, Mr. Major Blunt, I said. Major Hector Blunt? Asked the inspector, with a respectful tone in his voice. Blunt nodded. I didn't see him after dinner. The inspector turned once more to Raymond. Didn't you hear what Mr. Ackroyd was saying, sir? Only a few words. Mr. Ackroyd was saying, there have been so many demands on my financial resources recently that I cannot agree to your request. I did not hear any more.
这句话把这个回忆讲越深了，越描越黑了。
A demand for money, said the inspector thoughtfully. And it seems almost certain that Mr. Ackroyd himself must have let this stranger in. One thing's clear. Mr. Ackroyd was alive and well at 9:30. That is the last moment we know he was alive. If you'll excuse me, Parker said. Miss Flora saw him at about 9:45.
9:45的时候看到。
I was bringing a tray with whiskey and soda when Miss Flora, who was just coming out of this room, stopped me and said her uncle didn't want to be disturbed. You had already been told that Mr. Ackroyd didn't want to be disturbed, hadn't you? Yes, sir, but I always bring the drinks tray about that time, sir. Parker was shaking. His reaction looked more like guilt than shock. Said the inspector. I must see Miss Ackroyd at once. For the moment, we'll leave this room as it is. I will just close and lock the window. He then led the way into the small hall, and we followed him. Constable Jones, stay here.
这是个警察吧？
Don't let anyone go into that room. If you'll excuse me, sir, said Parker. If you lock the door into the main hall, nobody can get into this part of the house. The inspector then locked the hall door behind him and gave the constable some instructions in a low voice. We must get busy on those footprints, explained the inspector. But first of all, Miss Ackroyd. Does she know about the murder yet? Raymond shook his head. Well, she can answer my questions better without being upset by knowing about the murder. Tell her there's been a burglary and ask her to come down and answer a few questions. In less than 5 minutes, Flora came down the main staircase, and the inspector stepped forward. Good evening, Miss Ackroyd. We're afraid there's been an attempt at burglary, and we want you to help us. Come into the billiard room and sit down. Now, Miss Ackroyd, Parker here says you came out of your uncle's study at about 9:45. Is that right?
Quite right. I had been to say good night to him.
Was there anyone with your uncle?
He was alone.
像这样的话，那个 Dr. Strap 就可以被洗清了。
Did you happen to notice whether the window was open or shut?
Flora shook her head. I can't say. The curtains were closed.
Do you mind telling us exactly what happened?
I went in and said, "Good night, Uncle, I'm going to bed now." I kissed him, and he said, "Tell Parker I don't want anything more tonight."
其实这个时候他可能被人威胁着，别人顶着刀就当所有人都不要进来。
And that he's not to disturb me. I met Parker just outside the door and gave him Uncle's message. Can you tell me what has been stolen?
We're not quite certain, said the inspector.
The girl stood up. You're hiding something from me.
Hector Blunt came between her and the inspector. She half stretched out her hand, and as he took it, she turned to him as though he promised safety. It's bad news, Flora, he said quietly. Poor Roger's dead.
啊，这个人又死掉了，和他订婚的这个人死掉了。
When?
She whispered. Very soon after you left him, I'm afraid, said Blunt. Flora gave a little cry and fainted. Blunt and I carried her upstairs and laid her on her bed. Then I got him to wake Mrs. Ackroyd and tell her the news.
又死掉一个人。哎，这个记不得，是我记得是他每天都住的 ，it was conventional， 这是方便的，习以为常的。Why did Elizabeth decide not to tell Mr. Floor about his mother？ 怕他承受不了呀，是吧 ，Miss Floor？ give away 泄露。目前医生的嫌疑，我觉得排除了，也不可能是他是主角。floor 这个死前最后一次见他的叔叔。他的叔叔呢？他这个叔叔是个什么叔叔？ 不同意啊，同意他和贫穷的这个人在一起，然后最后这个贫穷的男的也死了，但是之前他们见过面，之前他们见过面，之前见过面，并且这是一个，对，我觉得现在锁定floor，确定死的了。再看看，但是他很晕倒了。和 Rogers， 这就是 Rogers。要看第一章，我看看最后，从第一天开始，你看。这个医生就 James。对啊，这个心灵机就没出现过了。 对，这个邻居一直很神秘 ，a suspiciously black a social police。好，今天没有提到那个 Roger。为什么他们又说到另外一个朋友，而且又说到投资，又说到油田，又说到金矿的事情 ？Ruffy 是谁？就是那个 Roger。Oldman 是谁？ Ruffy 其实就是 Ackroyd 的继子。Patton 是谁 ？Kevin Patton， 这是记得吧？Roger Patton， 哇，好乱啊！现在关系网。嗯？啊，我等一下，我找找关系网啊。关系网都记不得。可以了，今天到此，今天就到这里了，24分钟。